So it's another one of those popular things that you hear again and again and again, is we need to plant more trees. Like this is somehow going to be a solution for global warming. So I'm just going to go through some cold, hard numbers just to give you a feel for maybe how impractical this actually is, because you get all these news stories about, we need to plant more trees and, 1.5 billion trees to tackle global warming. So I'm going to start with a nice, simple number, which is the mass of the atmosphere. This is the goldfish bowl that we all live in. That's it. That's everything. And it's about 5 to the 18 kilograms. And the amount of CO2 in this is about 300 parts per million. It does by volume, but it's not that dissimilar by mass. Okay, it's 400 now. So what do we got? 5 to the 18 kilograms, which is, of course, 5 to the 15. That's the mass of the atmosphere in tons. And the CO2 was 300 parts per million. It's since increased to 400 parts per million. So it's a fraction of whatever, it's a component of the whole that's 300 e to the minus 6, 300 parts per million. So if we want to know the mass of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's just that one times by that one, and that's the tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's when it was 300 parts per million. And of course, it's gone up from 300 parts per million to 400 parts per million, so about 100 parts per million, which is that divided by 3. That's the anthropogenic extra CO2 from man. Okay? Now, there are about 8 billion people on the planet, but I'm much lazier than that. So I'm going to go for 5 billion. 5 e to the 9. That's the people on Earth. So you can see at this point that if that's the extra CO2 from man in terms of tons, and that's how many people there are, let's just look at this in terms of if I were to attribute everyone their portion of the extra CO2 in the atmosphere, it's going to be that divided by that, which is 100. I see it now. That's the, it's 100 tons, which is extra CO2 per person. Now at this point, I'm going to come back. It's a useful number to know that just by being alive, by breathing in and out, and not dying, you put out about a third of a ton per year. That's just the minimalistic amount of CO2 you can excrete per year. So that's tons metabolic. That's just what it takes to keep you alive. So how much is a typical Westerner lifestyle? You can get a rough ballpark feel for it. And for typical Western countries, it's about 10-ish tons per year. For less developed places, it's about 1 ton per year. So you can see that if everyone was living the first world lifestyle, you could put out this all of this CO2 that man has dumped into the atmosphere could be done within about 10 years. In reality, of course, not everyone lives that first world lifestyle, and that's why it's taken the best part of 100 years to get this far. From sort of 1940 to whatever 2020 is how long it took us to put that into the atmosphere. So 10 is the tons for a Westerner lifestyle. Cool. So how much CO2 will a tree soak up? Well, let's say a reasonable sized tree is going to be about 0.5 meter, That's what, foot and a half or something. So half a meter. I need to work out the volume of the tree. So it's going to be about half a meter by half a meter. I'm making my trees square because I'm lazy. And it's going to be 10 meters tall. It's what, 30 feet or something. So that's going to be how much the volume of the tree. But of course, trees are only about half of it's going to be water. About half of it is going to be sugar. Sugar, in terms of atomic composition, is actually pretty similar to CO2, and of course, that's where it gets takes the carbon dioxide and basically turns it into sugar. So you're looking at about half of that. It's going to be about 1 ton of CO2 is what you're going to sequester per tree, which means that, just for a typical Westerner lifestyle, you would have to grow about 10 fully grown trees per year per person who's living a first world lifestyle. And of course, that's only ever an offset, because after I don't know how long this tree's going to live. If it's fast growing, I don't know that much about the life cycle of trees, but at some point they fall over, they die, and they either rot, at which point they put all of that carbon dioxide back up into the atmosphere, or they get burnt and they put all of that carbon dioxide back up into the atmosphere. So this is only ever a stopgap measure. You only truly sequester carbon dioxide in trees is if you increase the total number of trees on the planet permanently. And you don't need to do just a little bit either. You need 10 fully grown trees. So whatever, there are, let's say, 50 million people in the UK. That would mean you would have to plant 500 million, 500 million trees every single year until you actually manage to reduce your carbon footprint. So I mean, the whole growing trees to grow. I mean, your fundamental problem is you dig this stuff out of the ground. That's the original source of the carbon dioxide, and you burn it into the atmosphere. Meanwhile, the surface of the planet is pretty much sustaining as much sort of green stuff as it can. You're not going to get huge amounts of extra vegetation there, and that's the fundamental problem you've got there. So anyway, that's just a quick look at some of the ballpark numbers of how many trees you would have to grow to offset a typical Westerner lifestyle. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and have a nice evening.